it's true. You are my destiny. When you hold my hand, I understand the magic that you do. You're my dream come true, my one and only you. Oh crap, I'm recording. Hello everyone, my name is Stonesy Boy and welcome back to Reading with Stonesy. Please don't mind the beginning of this episode. That was not supposed to happen. I have to start up my Steel series every time, and I was listening to some music and we don't talk about it. I'm probably not going to edit it out either because I hate myself. Anyway, speaking of hating, today we are reading Five Nights at Freddy's Fazbear Frights number 7, The Cliffs, or it should be called The Breaking Wheel. Last time we read the story of a man who lost his son to cliffs. Not from suicide, of course, but literally lost his son. His son was in cliffs. It's confusing. This time, I don't know what we're reading about. I forget what The Breaking Wheel is about exactly. But yeah, we'll find out together right now. The Breaking Wheel. I hate him, Reed whispered through the gritted teeth. From across the aisle of desk, Shelley blew long, dark bangs from the forehead, glanced back of the Julius's head, then rolled her eyes at Reed. Tell me something I don't know. Reed looked at her sideways. Just saying. Julius, as usual, has been bragging about his talents, and when he started complaining, typical Julius, he was either telling everyone he was better than they were, or he was trying to blame his problem on someone else. Too often, Reed had been the receiving end of the blame, along with the physical bullying that came with it. You need to ignore him, Shelley said. As if, Reed hissed. He's the world's biggest. Did you have something to add to Julia's observations? Mrs. Billings asked Reed. Mrs. Billings was a perfect teacher for this class, small and compact. A plain face, generally devoid of emotion, the head of a robotics class moved in jerky, precise movements that had sparked more than one conversation about whether she was an advanced robot herself. The first week of class, Shelley's twin brother and Reed's other best friend, Pickle, was posited. Who better to teach robotics than AI? Pickle was convinced Miss Billings was an android. For weeks, he had been devising a plan to prove his hypothesis, because so far the plan involved cutting into Mrs. Billings. Shelley wouldn't let Pickle go forward with it. So, what was the other teacher's pale skin was still a mystery. Reed tipped his chair forward and sat up straight on his desk. In response to Miss Billings' question, he said, no. Reed wouldn't add to Julius's observation because he hadn't heard him. All he heard was when Julius talked was a jerk's loud, nasally twang. Julius never said anything you wanted to hear anyway. He only spoke in insults, complaints, or brags. Miss Billings left her cool-eyed gaze on Reed long enough for him to start squirming before she shifted her attention back to the class and the whole. She flipped her long, wavy blonde hair as a shoulder as she spoke. So let's talk about Julius's concern. What would Dilbert do to prevent this remote from affecting Julius's exosuit? Reed knew that the class discussion is going to be research of IR versus RF remotes, and since it was bored him the first time, he didn't want to listen to it a second time. Besides, it wouldn't matter how much he listened. At this point in the semester, he knew that he was going to crash and burn the project in spite of whatever he'd learned or didn't learn. Reed looked to the mid-size, partially constructed exoskeleton sitting on the desk. He'd been working on it since Miss Billings assigned their spring semester project, but it looked as if he'd started because he seemed to have missed too much pertinent information in their class lectures. He tried to use the textbook to help him fill the blanks, but he didn't completely understand it. When Miss Billings had first introduced the concept of exoskeletons, he had defined them as crude frames that could be attached to other things or added mobility. She'd been explained that she could expand upon the frame's power source and add enough functionality to control the wearer. That's what had been his great project idea. He intended to make something fit over his little sister Alexa's extremely annoying baby doll. He thought it'd be cool to make a little doll to scare his sister. A classic brotherly prank, but this vision at this point was likely to become a reality. Shelley and Pickle got their projects over halfway done before Reed had gotten to their 10th of the way through his. And now they were both finished a couple weeks before the project was due. Admittedly, Pickle's robot was puny, about the size of a small remote-controlled car, just vaguely man-shaped, small metal skeleton, not a lot of personality. Pickle's robot wasn't much to look at, but his robot had mad abilities, which had tricked out custom remote. He would practically make a thing breakdance. Shelley's robot was similar, but dog-shaped instead of man-shaped. It was about the size of her Labrador, Thales, who, named after some man Shelley, has the first scientist, living between 624 BC and 545 BC. Thales of Miletus was an ancient Greek dude who did a lot of science and mathematics stuff. Reed could remember the guy's name when he lived, but for some reason he couldn't remember anything Shelley had said the guy did. Not that any of it mattered. What mattered was that Shelley's robot was supposed to mimic a well-behaved dog, and from what Reed could tell, she would probably win the dog show with the thing. He was going to get an A, like she always did. Why did he let the twins talk him into this class anyway? Sure, they were his best friends, but they didn't make him a science nerd like them. Reed was into computers, but not as they related to robots. He wanted to combine his love for fiction and his attitude for programming to become a game designer. He wasn't an engineer. And he sucked at building things. Shelley and Pickle knew this. After all, Shelley was the one who wouldn't let a year go by without reminding him of the complete ineptitude going all the way back to the building blocks that he used to play with when they were 5 years old. They're freshmen now, and yet Shelley got the giggles at every science model and historical event diorama assigned to them. Every one of Reed's construction efforts reminded her of the log cabin 5-year-old Reed had built. The cabin looked less like a cabin and more like the aftermath of an explosion. But in spite of what the good-natured ribbing, he knew Shelley hadn't talked him into this class, so she would laugh at him. As for Pickle, she was too uninterested in others' shortcomings to orchestrate Reed's humiliation. "It's fun when we take classes together," Shelley said to Reed when he signed up. Pickle had grunted when he argued for non-committal disinterest. The truth was Reed would do pretty much anything Shelley wanted to do. They were friends and they'd been friends for too long for her to think of him as anything but a friend. But he spent more time than he ever admitted thinking about what it would be like if she and Shelley were more than friends. But after almost 10 years, the idea still had his dad would call it the castle in the sky. But maybe it wasn't. Sometimes when he talked to Shelley, she looked at him with something of admiration, as if he was considering him in a different light. Take a cliche castle in the sky, for instance. One day when Reed and Pickle and Shelley were going off the bus, Shelley was talking about wanting something that was impossible. Reed had spotted clouds that looked exactly like a castle. He pointed at the castle-scape tower and said to Shelley, "Look, a castle in the sky. That means impossible dreams can happen, even if it's in another dimension." He was messing around, but Shelley said, "Actually, you're right." And then she squinted at him and suddenly gotten interesting. Reed looked over to Shelley now. Her attention on Mrs. Billings, Shelley was chewing on the ends of her thick black hair. She wore a meticulous thin chin-length style, which put the ends right at the mouth level. She always chewed on her hair when she was concentrating. It was one of the little imperfections he noticed about her, and all other imperfection, it was hopelessly charming. Nah, he didn't think Shelley and Pickle wanted him to humiliate himself for their amusement. That was mean, and they weren't mean. Maybe they were a little thoughtless sometimes, but they weren't wrapped up in their books and projects and forget and act like normal kids, but they weren't mean. Now Julius, he was mean. Reed shot out a dirty look at the artful blonde waves cascading down the back of Julius's head. Shelley once told Reed that Julius' hair was dreamy, even though he admitted it was personality. It was somewhere between detestable and execrable. The latter word, among others, taught Reed to never again buy her a word of the day calendar for her birthday. "Why does he have to use the RF remote?" Julius whined to Miss Billings. "I don't want this stupid remote to be telling my exoskeleton what to do." "My ears," Reed thought. When Julius whined, his voice climbed an octave, and when he sounded like a frightened weasel with a head cold. Who cared about the dreamy hair? Makes me gag, Reed thought. And who cared about Julius was tall and muscular, and shadow girls who rated boys on looks or for money instead of character thought he was a stud. Julius's voice told listeners everything they needed to know about him. He was a sniveling weasel who acted like an ass to people who wouldn't notice the sniveling weaselness. All expensive clothes Julius wore didn't cover his essential weasel identity either. No amount of skinny black jeans, gazillion-dollar basketball shoes, designer shirts, and cashmere scarves would disguise the true weasel. Reed looked at the dangling metal foot from Julius's gangly exoskeleton and hung off the right side of Julius' desk. Julius' project was a skeletal suit he intended to wear. A collection of metal frameworks attached to mechanical joints at the shoulders, elbows, hips, and knees. Julius' exosuit had leather straps and metal clamps that would hold a contraption in place on Julius' body. He'd been bragging about it would make him even faster and stronger than he already was. Whatever. Reed thought of the exosuits looked at a little scaffolding that raced the tiny people might create attached to the human body so they would climb up and repair it. Reed wished Julius' suit and scaffolding were a race for tiny people who would just fix Julius, who would certainly need it in repair. "Dilbert?" Miss Billings asked. Pickle looked up. His name was Dilbert, but his family and close friends called him Pickle, a play on Dill. "Can you explain the class your reasoning for using an RF remote?" "Sure, but I'm not going to be using an RF remote. I'm using the RF as an IR extender. I want my remote to be effective through walls, Pickle sniffed. I don't think the problem is my remote anyway. I've achieved my goal with my remote. If he hasn't achieved his goal, isn't it up to him to make adjustments? Why doesn't he, Pickle wanted Julius, install an RFI filter on the signal patch? Or he can use it, change his frequency. Or he can check his macros. He may have them programmed too close to mine. Pickle sniffed again. He didn't have a cold, he was just a perpetual sniffer. Short and dark like his twin sister. Pickle unfortunately didn't get his sister's looks. Shelley was pretty. It was just that no one other than Reed seemed to notice it because she was so intense. Or maybe it was that baggy button-down shirt she always wore in her jeans. Pickle, on the other hand, he had never been called pretty. With unusually deep-set eyes and nearly black unibrow and a long nose, his strangely small mouth filled with crooked teeth. Pickle's looks weren't going to open doors for him. He was going to have to rely on his smarts to get him through life. Thankfully, he had plenty to choose of those. Pickle narrowed his eyes to Julius and delivered a killing blow. He might even stolen my macros. I did not, Julius interrupted. His sound came out as cross, being a honk and a screech. Miss Billings pushed a button on her own remote, a remote that controlled at least a dozen robotic creations in the room. Robotic arms attached to a monkey holding symbols flung the symbols out and smashed them together. A metallic clang rang and hushed in the classroom. Julius crossed his arms and skulked, but he didn't whine anymore. Everyone else was still. After 5 seconds, Miss Billings was calmly in her flat, even tone. Dilbert makes an excellent point, Julius. I suggest you attempt to implement some modification strategies of your own. Successful robotics aren't about getting others to make changes so your creation functions properly. We will live in a world filled with RF signals. We're going to have to problem solve the issue using techniques and knowledge you still learned in this class. Reed grinned at Julius's red ears. Smackdown, ha! Reed looked down in the room and see if anyone else was enjoying Julius's embarrassment as much as he was. His gaze landed on Leah, a curvy girl with round glasses from Reed had admired for much of a year. No one ever wanted to talk to her, but her happy demeanor and self-confidence was unshakable. Leah noticed Reed's gaze and winked at him. Whether or not the wink was shared enjoyment of Julius's discomfort was unclear, but Reed smiled at her anyway. The rest of the 15 kids in the class didn't look toward either Julius or Reed. They were all either fiddling with their projects or looking at Miss Billings' figures. This class was exactly a cross-section of the normal freshmen, except for Julius, who was an odd combination of jock, brain, and bully. Everyone else in the room had been in the running for Geek of the Year, if there was such a contest. There were more glasses, bad haircuts, and mismatched clothes in this room than the rest of the school combined. Robotics class might as well have been called Misfits class. Now, Miss Billings said, if there are any other questions or complaints. No one said a word, no one moved. Good. Miss Billings stood and stepped over the blackboard. Let's move on to deeper discussion of actuators. I understand some of you are having problems there. So what are your 4 common types we talked about last week? Shelley's hand shot up. Reed suppressed a grin. Shelley had never been a question she couldn't answer, and for some reason she always enjoyed seeing her small square hand as bitten into a numb fingernail stuck up in the air, vibrating with eagerness. Her excitement was audible through the beaded bracelets that she liked to wear. They clacked together when she waited for Miss Billings to call on her. Yes, Shelley? Electric motors, solenoids, hydraulic systems, and pneumatic systems. Excellent. While she wrote Shelley's answer on the blackboard with her right hand, Miss Billings pressed another button on the remote in her left hand. A small spider-shaped skeleton crawled up inside the wall across him and stuck a light bulb-shaped sticker on the row next to Shelley's name, which was on a huge chart that collected all the class's names. Shelley had more stickers than anyone else. Reed had none. Reed turned away on the stupid chart and looked out the window at the tiny pale green buds on the oak trees outside the school. He wondered if he could go to the buds get bigger if he stared at them long enough. Watching trees go, that would be more interesting than this stuff. One of Mrs. Billings' robotic characters started marching up and down each row between the desks. An exoskeleton was vaguely shaped like a horse. Its hoof feet clapped against the gray linoleum floor as it pranced past Reed's dirty athletic shoes. Reed was pretty sure the robot was modeling an example of a hydraulic actuator, but maybe it was a pneumatic. He probably shouldn't have been paying more attention. How did Mrs. Billings accept anyone to pay attention when in this room full of animated characters, exoskeleton, and robotic parts? It was a sensory overload, like having a class in a circus. On top of that, even though Miss Billings wore conservative pantsuits, she obviously loved the color red. She splashed all over the school's institutional pale window walls and formed huge horses and myriad charts. It was distracted. A wadded up piece of paper lay on Reed's desk. Next to the pathetic skeleton, he blinked and glanced at Mrs. Billings, who had been back in the class. So as he spread out a paper, it was a note from Shelley. Coming home with us? Long homework session, followed by a smiley face. Shelley thought long homework sessions were fun. She looked at Shelley, and she was watching Miss Billings, but she nodded when Reed gave her a thumbs up. Not what he wanted to do homework, but she did want to go home with his friends, and besides, he had to do homework. At least he studied with Shelley and Pickle. He got better grades. As soon as Mrs. Billings dismissed the class, Pickle grabbed his robot and jumped up. He in his everyday because this was the last class before lunch. Pickle loved to eat. and he was the only other thing he'd been going for him. Pickle ate more than Shelly and Reed combined, and he didn't have much more meat on him than his metal skeleton robot did. The boy had a metabolism of a hummingbird. Today, Pickle was even bigger hurry. Today was half day because of the teachers had some conference to go to. After school activities had been canceled. There would be no late buses. The principal had announced in the morning that the school would be closed up and locked at noon. This meant Pickle and, of course, Shelly and Reed were in an afternoon of great snacks Mrs. Jared put out for the twins and their little brother. Ori on special days like this, even normal days like homemade pizzas, veggie egg rolls, and grilled sandwiches are typical after-school eats for the Jared house. But on special days, Miss Jared went over the top. Pickle, Shelly, and their little brother, Ori, were beyond lucky. Their mom was home to make them a lot of food this afternoon, another great meal later on the evening. Reed was lucky if he could scrounge up a few pretzels, he'd go home in his empty house. Luckily, he usually got home when the twins. If he didn't, he would have been skinnier than he was. Pickle started trotting up the aisle toward the door, and Reed picked up the project and tried to figure out how to shove it into his backpack. He didn't take his eyes off of Pickle as he folded and refolded the project's robotic arms, and he saw when Julius stuck out his foot and tripped Pickle. Pickle, who wasn't the most coordinated kid anyway, lost balance and flew forward the best in front of Julius. Pickle's big nose led the way whether his face went, and so his nose got burnt in the impact when it hit the corner of the desk. Blood spurted from Pickle's nostrils as Julius snorted a high-pitched laugh. Miss Billings, who had been gathering a stack of books and preparing to leave the room, didn't see a thing. Neither did anyone else. Everyone was too focused on where they were going. Even Shelly had her head down and collapsed her dog-sized exoskeleton into a puppy-sized one. It was a particularly clever part of her project, Reed thought. He told him he would figure out how to downsize Thales too, without hurting him, of course. He'd patent collapsible dogs and become a billionaire. Reed's muscles bunched as he watched his friend try to stop the spurting blood from one hand. Reed wanted to help Pickle and he wanted to confront Julius, but he knew he wouldn't lead him and put himself in the middle. As if reading Reed's mind, Julius turned and smiled. Julius' usually pointed canine teeth seemed to gleam under his classroom's fluorescent lighting. Not for this time. Reed fantasized that Julius was a vampire who had been vaporized by a stake through the heart. If Julius had a heart. Reed clenched his fist as Pickle ran through the room, clutching his robot in one hand and his blood nose in the other. Before Reed could tell Shelly what just happened, he got her to gag again and hurried Pickle, calling, "Pickle, wait up!" Julius gave Reed an evil eye for another few seconds, then turned to gather his floppy exoskeleton. All the other kids filed out of the room. Reed lingered. He wanted to say something to Julius. Was it Shelly that called Julius the other day when they were talking about him? Oh yeah, she wanted an anonymous, odious reprobate. Reed mentally repeated the words when he found ridiculous. Only Shelly would get away with saying something like that. "What are you staring at?" Julius asked Reed. Reed looked around. He realized that he and Julius were alone in the room. He hated his palms that started sweating. His breathing became faster. Why did he let Julius get to him? Julius stopped trying to get another suit. Instead, he carefully laid it out. He grinned at Reed. "Bet you wish you could build something like this, huh, moron?" Reed didn't answer. He wanted to pick up his backpack and leave, but something kept him in the room. What? He didn't know. He was sure the company, which sucked, and the decor, which he found intimidating, wasn't the smell, which was a cross between shock and smoldering. "I didn't know what you're doing in this class," Julius sneered. "I mean, your runty little friend may be a mini freak, but at least he had a few brain cells. And your other friend, a weird hair-chewing chick, an uppity cow. What with the little makeup, she wouldn't be bad to look at, and with brain cells too. You've got nothing going for you. You're a freak and nothing can make you worth looking at. And on top of that, you're all air up there, aren't you?" Julius leaned forward and flicked a finger at Reed's eyes. Reed tightened his fist and Julius noticed. "What are you going to do? Hit me? Didn't you know that I did to your pickle friend?" Julius laughed his beyond annoying laugh. "I didn't even have to lift a finger. I just moved my foot, and now he's a bloody nose. I just think of what I could do to you without giving it much effort." Reed swallowed. Julius had just called Reed an ugly, stupid freak, and yet Reed was still standing there as if he couldn't talk. Reed hated being called a freak, and he hated being called ugly. Yeah, Reed was a bit of an outcast, and his mom had died, and he hadn't been the point of trying to get along with anyone. He separated himself with his friends, using his overwhelming grief as a fence to erect a barrier between himself and the world. Only Pickle and Shelly had bothered to climb the fence. And no, Reed wasn't much to look at. The truth was, he was not unlike Pickle in the looks department, skinny with unusually long arms. His pronounced brow ridge and jutting jaw gave him more of an ape-like appearance than he wanted to admit. More than once, Joey called him monkey face when he was younger. Now his dad had let him grow out his curly brown hair long. He was able to disguise his primate features a little. If only he had an ape's strength. He still wanted to say something to Julius. No, forget saying something. He wanted to do something, but he couldn't. Why did he think things would go any different in high school than he'd been in grade school? Julius lifted his exoskeleton. "See, this here? I was going to use it to be stronger and faster. I don't need to be stronger and faster. I'm already strong and fast. I figured out a better use. I'm going to get this thing working perfectly. I'm going to hold you down and put you into it. Then I'll control the exoskeleton and make you do whatever I command it to do. You'll have to be my servant, and I'm going to make you wait for me all day long. You'll carry my books, tie my shoes, get me my food, clean up after me. I'm going to make you dance for me. What do you think about that, loser? Would you like to dance like a monkey for me?" Reed still didn't speak. Like he'd been turned into stone. All he could do was stand there and watch Julius lean over and tinker with the exoskeleton. Julius looked up and laughed at Reed. Got your tongue? Julius lifted his exoskeleton. Want to see it in action? It's pretty amazing if I do say so myself. Julius began fitting his suit into his long legs and V-shaped torso. The metal shell lay over Julius's limbs. The shoulder strap, chest strap, and hip strap, along with the clamps on the wrists and ankles, kept everything in place. Reed, biting the inside of his cheek hard enough to draw blood, remained spirited in the spot, watching. Outside the room, students laughed and called to each other. They headed to the buses lined out of the school. Inside the classroom, it was nearly silent, except for the chicks and snaps of Julius fitting himself in a robotic suit. See here? Julius held up his arm. He indicated the wrist and he pointed his ankles. I've equipped the exoskeleton with locking mechanism, so once I get you in it, I can keep you in it. Reed watched Julius struggle for some joints of the exoskeleton. Julius shifted his framework on his body and then adjusted the suit's piston cylinders. Outside, a couple buses started their engines and a baritone rumbling vibrated the walls of the school. If Reed didn't leave soon, he would have to walk to Jared's house. He'd have to walk over 7 miles, all because he stood there paralyzed and mute for the last several minutes. He shook his head and tried to figure out his brain rebooted. Julius, heavy with the exoskeleton riding his body, leaned down and fiddled with the wires between the skeleton circuits. Reed wished he had the guts to watch out, shoved Julius across the room, him and his stupid exoskeleton, but it wasn't a good thing he didn't. A second later, Reed was glad he didn't touching Julius. A radiant flash burst up like fireworks as power surge sparked the exoskeleton. Julius' body twitched. His eyes widened as he went rigid for several seconds. In those seconds, Reed's mind bizarrely thought of the previous day's word of the day. Sherry shared every one of them with him. He forgot most of them, but he remembered flugurant, which means flashing like lightning. The power surge was flugurant, he thought. With curiosity been happening next, Reed watched his stiffness leave Julius' body. Julius wavered his feet, lost his balance, and fell back at the desk, shaking his head. He grubbed his hair and slid into it. He put his head down. For what felt like long 20 seconds, Julius was perfectly still. Was he alive? Reed blinked and studied Julius' inert form. When Reed's gaze landed on the wrist and ankle joints in the suit, finally Reed moved. Stepping over Julius, Reed quickly locked the wrist and ankle joints. They fitted together in a satisfying snick. As soon as they did, Reed stepped back and grinned. When he teach ignominious, odious reprobate, Reed picked up his backpack and slung it over his shoulder. He watched Julius open his eyes. It took him a second before he oriented. When he did, he attempted to strip off the exoskeleton. Oops, Reed said. He backed out of the classroom door. He finally found his voice. I must have locked you in. My bad. Julius jerked his arms, yanking free from the restraints of the skeletal suit, kicked his leg with his right hand, and grabbed the exoskeleton, hugging his left hand. He grunted and strained. The exoskeleton wouldn't budge. What the hell did you do, punk? Julius yelled. Unlock me. I don't think so. Do what I tell you. Unlock me. Julius' face was a molten mix of red and purple. His eyes looked like they were bulging out of his head. Spittle clung to the corner of his mouth. Reed shrugged and grinned. He wouldn't remember the last time he was so pleased with himself. Not that he thought, though, he was going to the point where he was done. But he's messing with Julius was going to leave Julius in a suit overnight. Could he do that? Why not? Even trouble was why not? Julius would tell the teachers what Reed did, but all Reed did would have to do is deny it. If he made sure Julius was unlocked by morning, why would anyone suspect Reed of anything? Everyone knew he was pretty much a wuss. No one would believe he was encouraged to do this. Unlock me, Julius commanded again. His muscles and neck stood out like cords. His jaw started, and he kept opening and closing his fists. At this point, Reed usually really had no choice but to leave Julius there all night. If he let Julius out now, Julius was going to beat the crap out of him. If he unlocked Julius and ran, Reed probably would not run the guy. Julius was crazy fast, and Reed was an athletic spaz. If he waited until morning, there would be enough people around that Julius wouldn't touch him. The decision basically made itself. Julius was going to be locked overnight. The idea of buoyed Reed so much, he felt like he was floating. I'm going to do you a favor, Reed said, happy to have something clever to say. I'm going to leave you here in your suit overnight so you can get an idea what it feels like to have someone treat you the way you like to treat everyone else. Maybe a robot can teach you a thing or two. Hey, Julius tried to get up, but his exoskeleton was contracted and stiff. It was acting in a full body cast, keeping Julius' body locked in a seated position. Have fun, Reed called as he sprinted from the room. Before he left the classroom, he shut off the lights. Get back here, you stupid ape, Julius screamed. Do you know what you've done? I'm going to kill you. The last few words came out nearly unintelligible screech as Reed pulled the door closed. Julius began bellowing. I'm going to rip your head off and flush it down the toilet. I'm going to tear you apart limb from limb. Get back here and unlock this, Reed laughed. And for some reason, Julius' threats, which normally would have reduced Reed to a quivering jelly, sounded funny. For once, Julius had no power Reed had at all. Reed looked around the empty hallway. He was alone. Good. This whole thing was probably empty now. An auxiliary hall near the back of the school. It wasn't the outside of the class hours. No one would find Julius even if he yelled his head off. Come back here and let me out of this thing, Julius screamed. You can't leave me here like this. Reed grinned. He turned and ran to the school, hoping he wasn't too late to catch the bus. And that is it for the day. Wow. I mean, bully had it coming, but I don't think he should have been shocked like that. I'm surprised he was able to talk after so much electricity going through you so much that, you're able to see it like a fluorescent lightning. I don't know. It's some nerd thing that they said. But today we read pages 57 to 80, 23 pages. And next time we will be reading pages 81 to 10. What? 81 to 10? Well, what I meant to say is 81 to 100. So the next episode is going to be pretty normal, and then the one after that's going to be only 13 pages, so I'm going to have a nice little break. But you know what we don't break from? We never take a break from? Never, ever, 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 never, never, ever, ever, did ever, did ever, did ever, never, did ever, did ever, did ever. Well, cuz it's time for the reading corner of the day. Today we are reading about the English Cocker Spaniel. Now, this dog might look a little familiar, and that's because the English Cocker Spaniel and the normal Cocker Spaniel are very, very similar. I think the only difference is their history. So this should be relatively short, but maybe not. So, now that we know that this dog is not original and a little stupid, a little silly, and of course, me making fun of it, we need to know its history. So the history of the English Cocker Spaniel is that the Spaniel family is one of the largest groups of dogs that once specialized. The English Cocker Spaniel is one of the land spaniels. The land spaniels consisted of larger spaniels that were better for springing game, and smaller spaniels that were better for hunting woodcock. These different sizes appear in the same litters. They're essentially two variations of the same breed. Only in 1892 were the two sizes considered separate breeds, with the smaller size under 25 pounds designated as the Cocker Spaniel. In fact, because both breeds shared the same gene pool, there were many of the same hunting talents. In 1901, the weight limit was abolished. Cocker Spaniels became extremely popular in England, and the American breeders changed the breed in ways that traditional English Cocker Spaniel enthusiasts objected to. English and American Cocker Spaniels were known together until 1936, when English Cocker Spaniel Club of America was formed and the English Cocker retrieved status as a separate variety. The English Cocker Spaniel Club discouraged the interbreeding of American and English Cockers, and in 1946 the English Cocker was designated to a separate breed. After the breeds were separated, the American Cocker eclipsed the English in popularity, but only in America. Throughout the rest of the world, the English Cocker was by far the more popular of the two breeds. It is known simply as the Cocker Spaniel. Wow, so the difference is, basically, their weight and height, which is interesting. Next, we need to know the temperament. I want to own one of these. I'm in England. I don't want the American one. I want the England one. I want the English one. You know, the one that's not used for hunting, like those dirty Americans have. So, what is the temperament of it, Stonesy boy? Well, the temperament of it, good chap, is that the English Cocker Spaniel retains more of its hunting nature than does the American version, and it's also a little more exercise. It is cheerful, inquisitive, demonstrated, devoted, biddable, loyal, and sensitive. It's a social dog that likes to stay close to its human family. Now, the upkeep of this dog. Now, you want to know the upkeep of this dog. Maybe they share the same thing with the British and the American dogs, although American dogs eat more cheeseburgers than, the English dogs eat more biscuits and tea. I don't know. But I would love to go to England one day. Anyways, now you want to know the upkeep. So the upkeep of the English Cocker Spaniel is that they require daily exercise as a necessity, either in form of a long walk on a leash, a good run in the field, or a lively game in the yard. Although the English Cocker would physically live outside in temperate to warm weather, it is such a social dog that it needs best living inside and playing outside. The medium-length coat needs brushing 2 to 3 times per week, plus clipping around the head and ears, scissoring around the feet and tail every 2 months. The ears should be cleaned weekly. So these dogs are very, can easily become very dirty. So yeah, like I said, the English version of this dog seems to be very, how do you say, more of a show dog than a hunter. So yeah, it makes sense why this dog has so many requirements and to upkeep it. Now, for any side of this fun little game that we have of the English and Americans, please, if you're a child, cover your ears. If you're a teenager or an adult, get your notebooks out, because it's time to learn. Because we need to talk about the worst part of the book, the health. The health of the English Cocker Spaniel is that the major concerns are PRA, patellar luxation, legs, eyes. Minor concerns are cataracts, eyes, CHD, kidney disease, internal, and hypothyroidism, thighs, if I'm not mistaken. They're occasionally seen with cardiomyopathy. I hate that word. And the suggested tests that you should give them are hearing for pectorals, hip, eye, knee, and thyroid. So these should be tested regularly. I would say every 2 months. Their lifespan is 12 to 14 years, which is sad, but it's true. And there's a note given to me by the Encyclopedia of Dog Breeds, 2nd edition by D. Caroline Coley, PhD, which profiles more than 150 breeds of dogs. And it states that deafness is a major concern in pactocolors. CHD is more common in solid colors. PRA is a PRCD type. So the color of your dog matters. Interesting. Now, you don't have a family. Now, and you want to know the form and function of these little doggies. So, well, the form and function of the English Cocker Spaniel. Do you like this voice? I made it up just now, and it was either this one or it's going to be Manakuma. So, take your pick. So, the little form and function of the English Cocker Spaniel is that the English Cocker must be able to find, flush, and retrieve upland game birds a full day of hunting. It must be small enough to penetrate dense cover, but a sufficient size to retrieve larger game. The broad muzzle helps with retrieving. The dog is slightly taller than long, compactly built, and coupled. Whatever. This breed loves to hunt and shows it by wagging its tail when on the job. The English Cocker is a driving, powerful gait that covers ground effortlessly. The coat is a medium length, silky in texture, either flat or slightly wavy. The feathering would not be so profuse if it had been hiding in the field, but it would be long enough to protect the underside of the dog. The expression is soft and melting, yet dignified. What a dignified little dog. Ah, yes, my dog is dignified and a hunter. We hunt for gamecock, don't you know? But now, it's time for the final part of the learning corner of the day. We're doing it Stonseys Day, bop. And that is the tier list. Now, 5, for you cool chaps, is basically the best. 4 is better than average, I guess. 3, you're average, you're weird, you're cool, but whatever, you're average. 2, you're low, you're 4, the average. 1, the worst, the actual worst. Now that's gonna be bad depending on the situation in the tier on the tier list. Let's get this bad. So, the energy level and exercise requirements are at a 3, so it's average. Playfulness is at a 4, so they're more playful than the average dog. The affection level, friendliness towards dogs and friendliness towards other pets are at a 5, so they might be really good for a house dog. The friendliness towards strangers, ease of training, and watchdog ability are at a 4. So, they befriend your brother that they've never seen. They will, be easy to train, and they have pretty good watchdog ability. Their protection ability is at a 2, which, honestly, we haven't found an animal with a higher protection level than a 3, so that's about right. I think we'll get that more when we cover Rottweilers and stuff, or as it's called, the working group. The grooming requirements are at a 3, the cold tolerance are at a 3, and the heat tolerance are at a 3, so you need to groom them regularly, and they're pretty good with the cold and the heat. And finally, for the weight of a healthy breed of the English Cocker Spaniel, the male should be 28 to 34 pounds, and for the female, 26 to 32 pounds. I would bring up what pounds are in England. I don't know if it's kilograms or whatever, but I'm lazy. And the height for the male is 16 to 17 inches, and for the female, 15 to 16. So that is it for today for the English Cocker Spaniel, you twat. You can't say it in an English tone. I'm sorry. God, don't yell at me. Oh, wow, we're learning about another cool type of spaniel, which is something you'll learn in the next episode. Have you noticed I've been using that and is for the transitions? It's pretty smart. Or at least I find it smart. Do you find me smart? I don't think you do. I think you're mean to me. Tell me in the comments. So, yeah. Hope you guys have a fantastic, wonderful day. Be polite, be efficient, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time for the next reading of Five Nights at Freddy's, number 5, The Cliffs.